you. Hi. Morena te whānau, ko Jacinda Tokuingoa, and it is my pleasure to come on behalf of Coast Vineyard Church and be able to be with my extended family. It's very cool to be here. We are cheering you guys on from afar. Like ever since Sam and Jen and Charlotte and Luke and some others moved here and started the church, how many years ago is that now? 7 years ago, started 6.5. We have been hearing the stories of what God has been doing among you, and we are so for you, and so it is just such a treat for me to be here. We are only a few years ahead of you in this church planting journey, although my husband Matt and I have been pastoring for a long time, 30-something years. We planted our current church 11 and a half years ago, so our current church plant is just a few years ahead of you, so it's been pretty fun. It's a ride, isn't it? Yeah, this is going to work better if we talk. Okay, I'm kind of used to our crew back at home. They're very generous. There's not too much heckling, but there is some of this to and fro. So that would be awesome because otherwise I get bored with the sound of my own voice. Before we get started, I want to introduce you to my family. I think there we scrub up quite well. The only reason that I've got that photo is because it's actually the most recent one we had. My youngest daughter just got married at the end of May. And my eldest daughter, the one in the red with her husband at the end, they live in London. So we're hardly ever together. And I was like, I really should have got one with us in our normal attire. But I didn't think about it till everyone was back on planes. So this is us. And I don't do life without them. And they have helped me to become who I am today. So it's helpful for you to know my context. So your current series, which I am sort of stepping into the flow of, is this whole idea about becoming devoted disciples, isn't it? Yep, great. Good, because that's what I've prepared my message for. So it is actually incredibly inspiring. As Sam and Jen, we see them a number of times a year. I talk to Sam every week now. And so just hearing the stories of how you as a community, not just you as individuals, but you as a community of people are choosing to actively work out alongside one another, how do we actually do this following Jesus thing? And it is actually really inspiring to see and hear the stories of how that has been working out. And so we regularly are taking notes and being able to just be encouraged in our own journey. But I love the way that you are responding to God's invitation to live with purpose and with delight and in pursuit of flourishing in Him. It's very cool. So we're going to carry on. Today, I think a piece of scripture that's going to really help us in terms of underpinning our thinking and motivating our hearts is looking at John 15, verse 4, as we're learning how do we actually do life with the Lord? How do we do life with God? And John 15:4 says this is the Message translation. Live in me. This is God inviting us. Live in me. Make your home in me, just as I do in you. In the same way that a branch can't bear grapes by itself, but only by being joined to the vine, we can't bear fruit unless we are joined with Him, with each other. So that is both an invitation and a challenge for us. And so please don't hear this like I've got this all figured out. I've had a few more decades of getting to practice than some of you. But I'm in the thick of this as much as you are. The different seasons of life pose different opportunities and challenges. And so it's an ongoing learning. How do we contextualize our faith at any given time? And anyone else ever feel like, this is a thing to try to figure out? Yeah, so why don't we just pray and invite the Lord to be present with us as we do this. So Lord, we are so grateful for your presence here with us this morning. The opportunity to be able to come together to worship you and to know that you're gathering with us. And we know that you are the author and perfecter of our faith. You are the one that has invited us to this point and the journey that each of us has been on with you. And so I ask that today that there would be an opportunity to take one more step, the next step, to be able to pursue going deeper with you. In your precious name, amen. First of all, in terms of growing in this thing of being devoted disciples, is we need a plan, right? Any good thing, we need a plan to make it happen. If we want to make anything happen or we want to bring a vision into reality, we need a plan. We do that with our finances, we do that with our gym program with our personal trainer. We do that with our building projects, planning a holiday. We have a plan. If we start a business, we're wise to have a plan. And so the same thing is for us in terms of our spiritual journey. How often we don't often have an intentional plan, or we don't know where to even begin to get one. And so we often sort of feel like we're kind of fumbling around in the dark a little bit, it feels. It feels a bit haphazard. It's kind of one of those things that sometimes, do we just sort of bolt this on to all of the other things in my life? Do I just sort of add stuff to be able to do this? Is it sort of by accident, or if I hang out with this lovely group of people, will I sort of absorb it somehow by osmosis? No. I mean, you might, because we rub off on each other in a good way. But it's not enough, and it often leaves us feeling somewhat dissatisfied. Or just feeling like, I'm missing something. It's like we know there's something more, but I feel like I'm missing it somehow. And over the years, I used to think it was just me. I thought everyone else was super Christians, and that it was just me that struggled with this. But it turns out I'm not alone. And so if you've ever found yourself feeling like, everyone else seems to have this down, but not me, let me reassure you, we all have to wrestle our way through this. Paul often had to remind his people, the Apostle Paul, and when he was overseeing different churches, this is what he encouraged them with when he sent his letter to the Galatian church. Since this is the kind of life that we have chosen, the life of the Spirit, let us make sure that we don't just hold it as an idea in our heads or a sentiment in our hearts, but work out its implications in every detail of our lives. That is the pursuit of what it means to be a devoted disciple. Learning how to make Jesus that center point in our life takes work, and it takes practice. Jesus is worked out in our lives through the rhythms and the habits and the practices that we spend our lives on. There's a beautiful author that I've recently come across called Annie Dillard. Has anyone read any of her books? She's an American author, and she says this: how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. Days feel, I don't know about you, but they feel like they slip through my fingers really fast. And yet that is the place where all of the formational stuff happens in me, and suddenly years have gone by. Dorothy Bass, when she's talking about practicing our faith, she says, we long to see our lives whole, to know that they matter. We wonder whether our many activities might ever come together in a way of life that is good for ourselves and for others. Lacking a vision of a life-giving way of life, we turn from one task to another, doing as well as we can, but increasingly uncertain about what doing things well would look like. We yearn for a deeper understanding of how to order human life in accord with what is true and good. Isn't that the longing of our heart? Purpose, meaning, fullness of life. And Jesus leads us to believe that that is possible. That we can live a cohesive, integrated, rich and fruitful life with Him as we learn to abide, to be with, to stay with. It's not about fulfilling a whole bunch of rules or tick boxes, although to be fair, I am one of those people who love making lists just so that I can go along through the day and go, tick, tick. I mean, I write things on the paper just so I can tick it off. So work with whatever your personality is. But it's not about ticking boxes. It's not about meeting some requirements. It's about responding to an invitation for a life-giving relationship that overflows into everything and in every part of who I'm becoming. That is the thing that we're talking about today. So, we're going to look back to be able to walk forward. We're going to follow in the footsteps of our church mothers and fathers who have gone before us, and we're going to look at some of the examples and practices that they've left us as treasures, really, within our church history. There are rhythms of life. There are patterns and practices that are going to serve us really well as we seek to live this out. And we often get this a little bit mixed up in our Western context. While our relationship with Jesus is personal, it's not private. We're called to work this out in community, and that is one of the things that I think is a real strength of your church, actually. Your upper click groups, your small groups, the way that you do your prayer gatherings, you are working out alongside of each other the stuff of your faith. It's awesome. You aren't doing it just privately in your house. You're leaning into the strength of one another. That strength that comes from being connected with each other. You can't underestimate how powerful that actually is, because we discern things together, don't we? We learn from one another, we encourage one another, and we practice together. And I love the word practice. It means that I can fail and have another go. It's not like, oh my gosh, I have to nail this the first time I do it. I mean, when does that ever happen in anything we do in life? So we pick each other up and okay, let's have another crack at it. So that's what we're going to keep leaning into together. So there is this practice that has been handed down to us that helps us to be able to abide in and to follow Jesus day by day, and it supports us as we begin to try and orchestrate our lives and making him the center point, and it is called a rule of life. When you say rule in our context, oftentimes, might not be for you, but oftentimes there's this internal reaction to the word rule. It's like, oh, don't tell me what to do. I'm from strong pioneering blood. Our history is of people who have made something of this country, whether we were the people of the land or we're the ones that have arrived. We have made something wonderful to be able to live in this place. And so we have this strong pioneering thing in us, number 8 wire kind of attitude to life. However, this is not pushing against that really. A rule, it just comes from a Latin word that I probably won't say right, but it's regular. It's where we get the word ruler or regular, the way we would spell it, or a straight piece of wood. It helps something to stay in line. And for us, Charlotte picked us up from the airport yesterday, Emma and I, and we went for a wee drive because Emma's never been to your amazing part of the world. And so we were like, well, we have to show you before the rain comes. So we went for a drive. You know what this looks like because you have got fruit farms and vineyards everywhere. Trellis. Think trellis. That is what a rule of life is. It's the supportive structure that enables something to grow and to flourish. That's what we're talking about. From Practicing the Way, it's described this way. A rule of life is a schedule and a set of practices that help us create space in our busy world for us to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what he did. To live to the full in his kingdom and in alignment with our deepest passions and priorities. Now that sounds like a pretty great way to live life. Yes? I've got some people in the room who think it's good. It's great. Cool. Hopefully I'll catch the rest of you along the way. We know what this looks like, this whole concept of there being a structural support so that life can flourish. We are walking around in one. We have a skeleton that all of the rest of our body hangs off of. Without it, we would be a blob on the floor and wouldn't achieve a lot. Probably wouldn't be very comfy. So we understand the need sometimes for there to be this sort of sense of structure, something deliberate that we can have life built around. Or we look at plants on a trellis. There's all kinds of plants, including all of your fruit trees in the area and your beautiful vineyards. It's just this idea of there being some kind of structure or framework that we can weave our practices and habits around that enable us to live life to the full. We can do that. It just happens to be called a rule of life. But it's not a rule, like as in rules. It's not nothing legalistic to it. In fact, as we unpack it, hopefully you'll be able to rethink that if that's where your mind goes. It takes our hopes and our longings for a life lived with God and gives us a plan and a structure to intentionally weave our daily, weekly, monthly, annual rhythms, habits, practices around so that then we can live more fully into living life with God and what it would be that he would do in us as we do that. Andy Crouch tells us it is a guard to our habits and a guide to our lives. That's what we're wanting to lean into. So while the term might be unfamiliar, I think the practice we probably are a little more comfortable with. And it's helpful for us to realize that we actually, each one of us, already have one. We already have a rule of life. Think about this morning. Did you have to think about what you did when you got out of bed? Or did you just do it? You just have a thing. For my coffee-addicted friends, it probably included putting the kettle on or your coffee machine on or whatever and stumbling to the kitchen and getting your first cup of coffee. Or it's like if you've got small children, it's like, hey, we get up, we quickly go to the loo, and then it's all on because everyone's hungry all at the same time. Or for those of you very righteous ones who are extremely fit and go exercising on all of the days, it might involve getting up very early, because that's what fitness people seem to do. As you can tell, I'm not one. And go running or do your walk first thing in the morning. But you don't think about it really. Like from the time you get up to the time you're like jumping in the car, you've brushed your teeth, you've eaten your breakfast, you've probably had a shower, you might have fed the kids, you might have gone and done some exercise, you possibly had a quiet time. We did a whole bunch of things, but we didn't really think about it. That is your rule of life, and one part of it. But there will be all the other parts to your days, to your weeks, to your months, to your years that you will have unintentionally, to a large degree, be living your life around. What a rule of life invites us to do is to reflect on the current rule of life that we have and to intentionally make adjustments so that we are making space to be with God throughout our day, because that's possible. Yes? Sound okay? Okay, great. You're with me. Brilliant. I think a lot of the things that seem to creep into our rule of life that we aren't so conscious of, there's some that are really innocuous, like when I brush my teeth or when I have my cup of coffee. Who cares? However, what do I do at the end of a day when I'm tired? Am I reaching for another glass of wine? Am I just sitting and mindlessly scrolling through social media for hours at a time, which is not uncommon in our current context, right? Or spending a ton of money I can't really afford on online shopping, or watching porn, or any of the things that we unintentionally slip into as ways of coping with life that become habits or practices that we don't even think about. Like we're reaching for the phone first thing in the morning before we've even thought about our day. They aren't always life-giving, these things that we have within our unintentional rule of life. And this is an opportunity for us to reflect on that and make adjustments. The early church mothers and fathers knew that as well. They didn't have devices to contend with, but throughout humanity's history, we've always had things that have taken us away from the Lord and living out wholehearted, deeply devoted followership of Jesus. And they said, this is a quote from the Venn Foundation, their little book called The Hare and the Tortoise. It says, how we live, this is why this is so important, how we live shapes who we are. This is why this is so vital and worth contending for. Becoming deliberate about creating our rule of life is going to bring us face to face with the habits and practices that make up our days and allow us to choose another way where needed. And the Holy Spirit then invites us to cull some of the things, to make room for other things that are more life-giving and nourishing. And it's not actually, because you might be sitting there going, oh my Lord, do you realize how full my life is already? You're asking me to do more stuff? Oftentimes it's actually about removing things to make space for something better. It's not about adding a whole lot more. I know you're doing the Practicing the Way course, and John Mark Comer, there's no right way of having a rule of life where it's kind of personally tailored, which I kind of love. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a personally tailored rule of life. But John Mark Comer suggests 9 different areas that we would be wise to include in our rule of life, and these are them. Sabbath, which I know that these guys champion and you guys have been working into your lives for a long time. Solitude, prayer, fasting, scripture, community, generosity, service, and witness. That sounds quite exhausting, doesn't it? Like when you look at, and I was looking, I was like, oh, okay. Okay. So we don't do them all at once. It's things to move towards. It's always with that goal of, this isn't just stuff for doing stuff for stuff's sake. This is about deliberately living in a certain way because I know it is forming who I'm becoming. That's why we think about this, because it's transformative. Ruth Haley Barton, who's a spiritual director, she says this: Christian tradition has a name for the structure that enables us to say yes to the process of spiritual transformation day in and day out, and it is called a rule of life. A rule of life seeks to respond to two questions. Who do I want to be? And how do I want to live? Actually, it might be more accurate to say that a rule of life seeks to address the interplay between these two questions. How do I want to live so I can be who I want to be, who Jesus is inviting us to be? Remember, it's not about doing more. It's often about doing less. It's about decluttering my life to make room for the life I long for, that you long for. If we think of it a little bit like a living document, that can be quite a helpful thing because it invites us to do regular review, regular reflection. We can tweak and adjust. I'm a bit of an enthusiast. I'm a number 7 on the Enneagram. I'm like, woo, I've got like a new idea. I am all in, like, woohoo. And so I'll like set the bar crazy high. I'm like, I'm going to do all of the things. I'm now in my mid-50s. I have learned through many times of failing, that doesn't work. I just cannot sustain what my enthusiasm at the beginning of a thing invites me to want to step into. So the wiser approach that I have learned from some other more settled people and from my own mistakes is like, do less. Start with less so that it's actually sustainable, and just gently, slowly, trust the work of the Holy Spirit to be slowly forming these things in us, to be capturing my heart with the longing to do the things that I want to long for, that I don't always long for at the beginning. It's not rigid. A rule of life, even though it sounds like it's a rigid thing, I was looking at all of your vineyards and things when we were driving around yesterday, and a lot of them it's wire. They've got those big, I don't know, you can tell I'm really equipped for this. The big bits in the ground. Posts, there we go. I knew there was a word. And then they've got like these long wires, right? And then they kind of reinforce them along the way. I have the gist. And but there's flex in them, actually. Even though they're kind of training the plants to grow around them, those wires, there's some flex as well as stability. In the same way, we want our rule of life to feel that way. It should bring a sense of freedom, not of constraint and rigidity. It should feel like a pattern, not a padlock. It's a rule that bends, okay? That is really, really important that we get our head around that. Otherwise, we just feel like we're setting ourselves up to fail or just live an impossible thing. So this offers a way for us to learn the unforced rhythms of grace that Jesus invites us into. Remember, he says, I'm not going to lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me. And I'm going to teach you how to live freely and lightly. This is helping us to do that. So, how am I going for time? I've got no clock. It's a dangerous thing. I'm a woman of many words. Someone's going to tell me to stop. Okay, great. Okay, as we begin looking at a rule of life, or more likely, because we are not actually creating the new one, we're revising the one we're already living. Okay? Here's a couple of baseline questions. I don't know if I put these up on a slide. Sorry if I didn't. Does this move me, with all of the things in our life that we're currently doing, when you're doing a review, does this move me toward Jesus or away? Second thing is, am I becoming a more loving person? Because love is the benchmark of spiritual maturity. It's not how much we know. Learning stuff is really good. It's really important. But if we're not becoming more loving, but just this kind of puffed up person who knows a heap of stuff, doesn't count for a lot in the kingdom. We're called to grow in love. So are the things we're doing helping us to become that kind of person? Here's a couple of thoughts on creating an intentional rule of life. Make it doable. So these are the things that I have tried and failed and tried again. So I'm trying to make it easier for you. Plus I've read stuff that they agree with me, so we're going to go with that. One of the best things I was told is start where you are, not where you're not. Do what you can, not what you can't. It has to be doable. I wish I was a more spiritual person that could do this. However, the reality is, I am this person. This is where I am in my journey of faith. This is the stage of life that I'm in, the season of life I'm in with my family. My rule of life now does not look the same as when my kids were teenagers and I was in the car every 5 seconds driving them hither and yon to all of the things. I am now enjoying the post-children phase of a little more freedom. So I can live a different way. So I have to do what I can, not what I can't, and that's going to sort of adapt. Sabbath. So I grew up I came to faith when I was young, walked away for a chunk of years, came back in my early 20s. I didn't know anyone who did Sabbath. I'd barely heard of it. That's true, I did hear of them. That is true. Although I wasn't allowed to listen to them because they were dodgy. We're meant to burn our records and pull out our tapes then, but that shows you how old I am. Sabbath, yeah. So I had no working examples of Sabbath other than I thought it was this whole religious thing and it was very rulesy. And you weren't allowed to do a whole heap of things on whichever day it was, Sunday usually. And then I had friends like Mr. Sam Harvey and Dan Sheed, who I think you had come speak here just recently, hey? Some of these, and reading John Mark and, doing spiritual formation programming, all the different things. Over the last 15 or so years, beginning to hear people's stories about what Sabbath can look like when it's lived. And so along the way, the Lord sort of caught my heart with this thing. I'm like, okay, this feels really important. It is really important. And I've got to figure this out. Oh my gosh, it's really hard. I didn't know that just taking one 24-hour period off would mean I'd need to reorchestrate my whole week to make it happen. And I still feel like I am like constantly, Lord, how do I do Sabbath? I'm stepping into fasting. I have a health condition that's meant that fasting's been problematic for me in the past. I haven't been able to just not do food. But my doctor's happy with me at the moment, and so we're having a crack at it. And I'm being inspired by a bunch of 20-somethings in our church who have caught the bug for fasting. Cool, eh? My 22-year-old daughter came home and she's like, why did you never teach us about fasting? You should have. I mean, we're the pastors. She's like, you should have taught us this stuff. You haven't, So I'm like, yeah, no, fair enough. We learn it. We practice it. We do it alongside each other. We take inspiration and we learn from one another. Start where you are. Make it small and specific. One thing. Start with one thing. So for me, for years, it's been like, okay, in the last few years, how do I live Sabbath in a way that is life-giving? That brings this opportunity to stop and to rest and to delight and to worship. How do I do it? Do one thing. And honestly, I feel like, I do some other things, but like that's kind of my new one of the last few years. Now I'm adding fasting and, alongside scripture and prayer and all the things. It's okay, I am a Christian. But just do one thing and be really specific about what that is so that you can actually hit a target instead of this waffly notion, of a thing that actually I don't know how to live. So be specific. Allow for the realities of your personality, of your stage of faith. And I know that you've had teaching on stages of faith, so hopefully that will help you, equip you there. Your season of life. If you've got toddlers or babies where you haven't slept through the night in years, then you might be lucky if you have a 10-minute window where you could shut yourself in the bathroom or in your walk-in wardrobe to have a quiet time. That might be it. Compared to someone like me who can get up at my leisure. Oh, that's mean, isn't it? Because that's mean. I've earned it. But I recognise the privilege of the season I'm in. I do get to choose to take a more lingering approach to being able to spend time with the Lord in the morning. That was not a reality then. So take that into account and allow for spontaneity as well as structure. How am I doing for time? Okay, cool. The other thing is include upstream and downstream practices. So when we're talking about, practices, some of the spiritual disciplines, the things that I know that you've been learning about, practicing the way, all of the things. Some of the things are new to us and are going to stretch us and grow us. Like for me, this whole Sabbath journey in the last few years, that has been an upstream practice for me. But then so any upstream practices are those ones there's the stretch, there's the pull, There's the learning. There's the trying and failing and trying again. Then there are the downstream practices that come more easily because actually I've been working on this for a long time. Prayer would be a space for me in that, and different ways to pray. I've been doing it longer and it feels more downstream, although in saying that, there's always upstream bits to that. But do you know what? Get the idea? Cool. And then regularly review and make adjustments, like every 6 months or quarterly, whenever you want. But get into the habit of actually stopping and having a look at, is this working? And then if it's not, don't like beat yourself up. Just go, okay, I might have bitten off a bit more than I could chew. So Lord, would you give me some wisdom based on what has been sustainable, what has been doable, so that I can take that and run with it. And maybe I push that bit just on pause for now and I come out, maybe I can add that later. The Lord will lead us if we invite him to. But if ever that voice in your head, does anyone else have like this really critical one that's like quite loud and bossy? Yeah. It's like I'm learning how to turn the dial down, the volume down. Lord, help me to not listen to that one who tells me I'm just a failure and I should just give up before I even start. Lord, would you turn up the one that actually shows me that I'm making steps, tiny baby incremental steps. It doesn't even matter. Sometimes it feels like life is so stinking full that just falling on my face in the right direction is progress. None of this soaring on wings like eagles. You know, you have your moments. But most of it is just like incremental, moment by moment, step by step, but we're moving in the right direction. Margaret Gunther, she's an Anglican author and spiritual director. She says this, a good rule can set us free to be our true and best selves. It is a working document, a kind of spiritual budget, not carved in stone, but subject to regular review and revision. It should support us, not restrict us. So whenever you forget that, go and look at those long wires that you've got in your orchards down here and just go, it should support me. So it's like I'd completely forgotten when I was writing this, how your whole landscape can be a constant invitation and reminder and encouragement to you. Every time you drive past those places, it's like, oh yeah, my rule of life is to support me to flourishing. I'm jealous now. Although I've got to say the hay fever's not good, so maybe I'm better where I am. And then in terms of, okay, yep, great, Jacinda, that sounds great. I'm going to have a crack at this. Where do I start? Start with the thing that catches your heart. The thing that as you go through the Practicing the Way course, or you're looking at any material on spiritual formation and growth, or any of the conversations that you're having in your groups or in church or any of that, sometimes there will be this recurring theme that just seems to catch you. It's like it's got a glimmer to it that just like, draws me in. Start with that. That's what Sabbath was like for me. It was like, that podcast seemed to pop up at just the right time, and that book, and that person that just told that story, and then this, like it was, and then I found my heart moved there. Start there. Do that one thing, your next thing. I've got a couple of books up here which you may or may not already know. Practicing the Way, which I'm pretty sure you know about. But then The Hare and the Tortoise by the Venn Foundation. They're based here in New Zealand. It's a little book, but it's super encouraging around some of this. And it's got some invitations about looking at rule of life. Sacred Rhythms by Ruth Haley Barton is another one. There is another one I forgot to put on there by a man called Ken Shigematsu, and it's called God in My Everything. And that is a beautiful book. Can't believe I didn't remember. To include in your library and your reading as you're looking at how do I do this rule of life. And then the Practicing the Way website have got now a rule of life builder that actually help you to look at those 9 things that I read out earlier on and some different practices within those 9 things that we could begin to lean towards. I have to admit, I did a quick review and had a wee look, and some of it was like, I haven't got many going on in that space, but that's okay. I'm turning up the volume on the things I'm moving forward in and not beating myself up on the things I haven't. But it could be a really helpful place to start. It's free, so you could jump on their website and find that. And I think will bring us into land. So, a wonderful quote that kind of caught my heart and might do yours says this: I don't know about you, but I yearn for the freedom and beauty of a life that is completely oriented to the reality of God. I long to experience my soul hidden and content in the very depths of God, so that what is seen on the surface is transformed and energized by what takes place in these depths. The choice to orient our life to God's transforming presence is always ours. Sacred rhythms help us to say yes to this desire day by day by day. I want to invite you. I call you to this. Just as Jesus did, just as he still does. And for, like the invitation, I just felt like, oh Lord, would you capture our hearts again, our minds, our imaginations, with a vision of what a life lived with you could be like? And would you then make us so captivated by that we're willing to change whatever needs to be changed to help us go there? I woke up this morning, I thought I was going to invite you to consider a few things, but actually I woke up this morning and I wonder if it's this. For some of us, I wonder if we actually just don't have a vision for life lived with God. That's not a shame thing, condemnation thing, any of that, but our lives are so full and distract us so much that I wonder if for some of us, we've just lost sight of how important this is. Maybe we've never had it. But when we talk about rule of life or transformation or any of that, it just doesn't seem important enough or urgent enough to get our attention, if we're honest. And if that's you this morning, I can heartily say, after a number of decades of doing life with God, life is definitely better with him than without him. And I think he invites us to give this a go, to taste and to see that he really, really is good. He really is. St. Augustine, I wonder if we just steal his prayer and we adapt it for us. He was a 4th century theologian. He had a prayer, and this is the prayer that came to mind this morning, so I wonder if we just borrow it. Lord, would you put salt on our lips that make us thirst for you? Because then nothing else is going to satisfy us, and it will make us contend for this.